Such a pleasure to be here today again at Education Talk, Ostos Community College, Continuing Education and Workforce Development, CUNY in the Heights at 5030 Broadway. I am so excited to have here Tarin Almanzar, who's the Director of Financial Aid and Admission at Columbia Journalism School. And how did we meet? Tarin, it was when we had the first fair, the Financial Aid Resource Fair. She was one of the volunteers. So thank you so much for being here. And I wanted to add that it was her idea as well to have a second forum relating to financial aid and how to access those funds and how to do the application. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and for hosting this wonderful event. As you mentioned, it's very critical for students to know about their finances and how to mitigate the cost of attendance. So,
I want to remind everybody that the event is scheduled for March 2nd, 2018. And immediately I want to say that it's for sophomores, juniors, and of course seniors that want to get into college, or folks that applied that, you know, they had a roadblock in their life, but now they want to go back to school and they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever that is. So I want to make that clear. Now, Tarin, I wanted to learn a little more about her before we get into the discussion because, you know, she's a successful young professional. How did you get into the School of Journalism? How did you land this wonderful job?
Absolutely. When I was in undergrad, which I did it at Pace University downtown, I started off as a work study because most students or most people do not know that a financial aid office and admissions office exists until you start the process. So I started there. About a week later, I said, I'm quitting. This is not for me. Fast forward 20-something years later, and I'm still here. I worked at Pace for a couple of years. Then I moved over to Columbia because I wanted to pursue a master's degree. And I looked at the finances and I said, well, I need to figure this out. I need to know how I can pay for it. So that's how I started working at Columbia, pursued my first master's degree in organizational psychology. If you don't know which degree to pursue, go for org psych. It's wonderful. Then I started working in journalism, and I started working in the admissions office, and I realized that I love it. I love admissions, I love student services, and I decided to go for a second master's in higher ed administration there.
And they paid for it?
And they paid for it.
As an employee, they pay.
As an employee, that pay for it. You have to pay taxes, but in the end, it works out. But it's totally worth it, and that's how I ended up in journalism, and that's how higher education is my passion, is where I belong.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your future. I wanted you to learn more about that. It is possible, that the dream is possible.
It is possible. It is possible. And what I want to say for those of you, even if you're, as Senny was mentioning, if you have taken a break and you're thinking of coming back, the years are going to pass by whether you are in school or not. So take the time now and invest in it. A year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, again, are going to go by whether you're here or not, and just find out what you're passionate about and go for it.
Thank you so much. Now, going back to the event, Tarin will be the person who's going to conduct the workshop relating to financial aid, the requirements. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're going to speak about that day?
Absolutely. What I'm going to be discussing is what is the cost of attending. I know we get caught up in tuition, but we also have to think of other things that are included in that cost of you going on pursuing your degree, your living expenses, fees, and everything else. Books, transportation, all of those things I'll be talking about living like a student and what does that mean, and the sacrifices that you have to make so that you can plan.
Not taking that credit card without having a job and putting it up there, and then your credit. It's very important for students to know that credit, to maintain good credit, it's like very important. Do not get into those easy credit cards. I remember when I went to college a very long time ago, and they had companies outside recruiting. You don't have to put anything.
Yes.
I unfortunately did not have the culture or the know-how, and I was caught up into that.
Right.
But luckily I did have a job, but there are other students that I know of that got stuck with it, that couldn't pay it. So that's one thing to let students know, that having a good credit is very important, regardless of the financial aid that you get or not.
Exactly. And that comes into living like a student.
Yes.
If you're a student, you shouldn't be taking out these credit cards. You shouldn't be getting yourself into debt because you're not working. You're not in the professional world as of yet.
Right.
So those will be things that I'll be talking about. I'll be talking about the free application for federal student aid, which every school pretty much requires it. I'll be talking about paying attention to deadlines, paying attention to the forms that you have to fill out. Every school has its own application process. I'll be going over the documents that you will be needing. Even if you're not filing for taxes, what does that mean if you don't have it now and the deadline is before? So it's pitfalls that you need to be aware of and be conscious of. I will also be going over what you're going to be eligible for and how do you apply for that, and the amounts that are available, and how do you talk to your financial aid office, because that's another key thing that people are usually afraid of walking in or asking the questions. And I usually stop students and say, that's what we're here for. Even if you're not passionate about it, that's what the person that's sitting there, it's getting paid for. You have to go in respectfully,
of course,
but do not be afraid of it.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the W-2s, because that's one topic that I discussed with Senator Alcantara and Angel from her office, as he's a recent grad.
Right.
That parents need to come with their students, with their children or son or daughter, because their income is critical. When you as a student are dependent of your parents, you need to submit your parents' W-2. And that can be a conflict. I mean, some parents don't want to give it up. It's important. Parents need to come and learn the process, because they're going to be helping out their young professionals now. They're going to have a professional career, and the career is as a student, right? They have a career as a student, and they become the professional that goes out there. But it is critical. Parents, you need to put in the time. This is why we're doing an event from 2 to 5:30. We'll probably be here till 6, because the kids cannot be doing this on their own, especially when they're dependent.
That is absolutely true. And for those parents that may not file for taxes for whatever reason, do not let that be a deterrent as well. Come in with your financial situation, and we'll work with you, and we'll tell you how to file for those forms if you don't file for taxes. So again, do not let that also be a deterrent for you to come in. Or a
barrier to come in. So in the end, ladies and gentlemen that are watching us, Tarin is saying here that regardless of your income situation, there's always ways to work things out. So if you're on public assistance, you bring the paperwork. If you depend on an uncle or whatever that is, there's students out there that live in a shelter. Just bring in that information. That will not deter you from completing your dream of going to school. Tarin, I can't thank you enough for taking the time. I know that you're working today. You are an example of what our community deserves and is. Thank you for putting in this is extra time that she's taking of her time to come bring us the information. She will be here that day. I wanted to also add, if you wanted to add anything to this interview, encourage parents and their children to be here.
I would only say 2 things. I'm a psychology major as well. This is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Before you can start thinking about your career and moving forward, you need to start taking care of yourself and the financials. And this is where it starts. And most of all, it's a safe environment. We're friendly. We're here. There is, you can ask any questions. I always say asking questions saves a lot of guessing work. But the most critical thing for you to know and to think about and keep in the back of your mind, it's a safe environment.
Tarin, last but not, I know we said last, one more thing. Parents that are there, do we have Spanish-speaking personnel that can explain this to the parents in Spanish?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yo hablo español también, así que podemos con ustedes explicarle todas las preguntas. Y sí, claro.
Gracias, Tarin. Ya te vemos el día 2 del mes que entra.
Sí, así mismo. Okay.